You can target a certain problem in a certain area by looking at your data. And if you don't have your data, or your data is not collected in the same portal, if you will, and there's different silos that are collecting data here and here, but you're not sharing it, do you really know that you have a problem?
You're listening to the Retail Crime Intelligence Podcast by Auror, where we share actionable insights to help you reduce crime and violence in your stores.
Sean, welcome. Thanks so much for suggesting this podcast for us today.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, really cool to be here together at RCC. My first time being at the event. So far, really great content, lots of informational sessions, different solution providers in the area and retailers coming together. It's always great to see. So I'm not going to go too much into your credentials without letting you introduce yourself to the audience, but personal highlights for me, 23 years with Toronto Crime Stoppers is huge.
Right.
Just, as this problem of ORC and violence in stores is growing, being at the forefront of, stopping that is huge. So I want to commend you for that. And 3 decades, various roles with retail in this space. So why don't you go ahead and tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and we'll jump right into it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for doing the podcast and keeping the discussion going. As you said, 23 years with Toronto Crime Stoppers. It's a volunteer position. We work really closely with our police partners in Toronto, as well as other GTA law enforcement agencies when it comes to information coming in and how it's being disseminated and whatnot. And then on the retail side, I've been, over 3 decades in the retail corporate security environment, various positions with different organizations. But, the reason why, I'm here today and the discussion we're having is more on the Crime Stopper side of things and understanding, what we can do as a civilian board of directors and working with our retail partners as well as our police partners to, help combat and bring attention to what we're seeing with organized retail crime.
Awesome. Yeah, we love that. I mean, that's huge to the Auror mission, right? Just bringing retail and law enforcement together. And it's great to see that you're kind of at the forefront of that community in Toronto. So I think jumping right into it, transparently, Auror is relatively new to the Canadian market. We have lots of experience in North America in general. But can you walk us through a little bit of how the Canadian retail market specifically has been, impacted, or what makes it unique for loss prevention teams?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing uniquely for us, the hurdle, if you will, or the challenge is the privacy regulations that we need to deal with. When it comes to sharing information and what we can and cannot talk about in the presence of each other without law enforcement being there. But that's where we kind of insert, Crime Stoppers as a information tool. We're dialed into looking at community awareness issues, especially when it comes to crime challenges that our communities are seeing. Retail crime has been on our radar since 2013 when we looked at the growing issue of what it was back then, at a $4 billion issue. Fast forward to 2022 into 2023 when we did another awareness campaign, and it grew to about 5 billion. And now, 1 year later, a year and a half later, since we did our last campaign in 2023, it's at $9.1 billion, right? So clearly there's a problem, working really closely with law enforcement and retailers and doing what they can do, to combat that. But from a Crime Stoppers perspective is really making the community aware. And, crime prevention is a shared responsibility, and making sure that, everybody that is in the community understands that we all have a duty, to bring things to the attention of law enforcement when it's a sense of criminality. And when we're seeing the increase of crime happening at retail, it brings that elevated issue of violence, right? And that's really what is the most concerning when you talk to retailers out there and in what we do and how we build out an awareness campaign is how do we make our people safe? Yeah. And then working with the community through awareness campaigns to encourage that intelligence and that information flow into Crime Stoppers, which is anonymous, and then getting that over to our law enforcement partners so that they can action it. In 2022, when we started launching our next series of campaigns to where we are now, we have a dedicated website called itcostusall.com, where you can see the campaigns, you can understand and learn a little bit more about retail crime. But most importantly, it's a platform that you can remain anonymous and say, hey, I know who's stealing. I have a neighbor who's doing this, or I know where they're selling this stuff, right? And that's one of the focuses that we need to dismantle is the supply chain, right? If there's no demand, then you're not going to have people out stealing. But it's also understanding and working with all stakeholders to reinforce that property crime is fueling the violent crime. Here in Canada, likely elsewhere around the world and into the US probably, but it's being looked at as a victimless crime. It's shoplifting. And part of it is shoplifting when you talk about what causes shrink. But the biggest majority of what we're seeing that is concerning is organized retail thefts. It's the bandits that are coming in with a list, and orders to go and get it, and very, very fearless and not worrying about who's in front of them. It could be an employee, it could be a security guard, or it could be the customer.
Somebody just coming in and shopping.
100%, right? And then there's the liability around it and what retailers need to do. So it's very, very concerning, and it's being looked at very seriously here in Canada. I
love that you're taking the approach of not just what's happening in the stores, but what happens after the effect, right?
For sure.
Bringing the community into it.
For sure.
That this obviously fuels other crimes that aren't ORC related, and that impacts, neighborhoods and communities as a whole. So I think it's 2025, long gone are the days of the pawn shop or the fence location. Those do still exist, but you've got the e-com opportunities, the different marketplaces online where the stuff can be out of a store and in a shipping box in a matter of seconds. So
for sure. And you hear about it. I mean, having conversations here today with some of our law enforcement partners and what they're seeing. Right across the street, there's a shipping container that is ready to go somewhere in the world with stolen product from Canada. And you're absolutely right. It's fueling other concerning criminal activities within our communities when you talk about gang activity, gun activity, human trafficking. And a lot of the community members don't realize the connection that all of this activity has. You just see it as shoplifting. And well, hey, listen, the big box retailer there, they can absorb the loss. They got the money. But when you dial it back and you're like, well, wait a minute, they're doing this to fuel that. Then people will start paying attention. And that's what we're trying to do through Crime Stoppers and some of our strategic campaign development. And how do you show an image that someone can resonate to say, hey, wait a minute, I know what that is. And I didn't know that was a crime.
Yeah. I think when you're talking about $9 billion, right? Like that's a huge amount. So leveraging data and insights that retailers are collecting today is huge. And, some of the stats that we've seen in North America as a whole, right, is that, 10% of people are causing 68% of that loss. So if you apply that to the 9 billion, that's a big chunk of change. And I think using that intel to say, hey, here are the top groups we need to focus on, and then fueling that through Toronto Crime Stoppers is a game changer, because you're providing more awareness, you're providing visibility to these people. And just want to double tap right there on the comment around violent and aggressive. I mean, 1 in 8 events involving a violent or aggressive behavior, right? And that could be something as a verbal threat or a weapon being involved, right? So,
but it impacts the whole retail ecosystem, right? When you think of the employees that are working in retail, you're a young teenager, you want your first job, your friends are, working at the mall. So where do you want to work? You want to work at the mall with your friends, maybe at not the same location, if you will, but you're having, an impact when it comes to the human resource perspective of retail, because they're scared, because either they've gone through an incident or they've seen an incident within their store, or they've heard of incidents, or their parents are like, hey, we don't want you working in retail. And then you got the consumer, as we said, that are just coming into shop. And then by default, you get a bunch of guys and gals running out of the store that have just, done a retail theft, and they knock them over by accident, if you will. And now it becomes a liability, not only for the retailer, but for the property manager, so on and so forth, right? So there's all those different things that, we look at and, are all tied into this. And when you talk about $9 billion, I mean, who's paying for that? Right? I mean, the retailers are in business. They are going to offset those costs back to the consumer. And people need to understand that there's a whole economic equation behind, why prices are going up. It's not just because of inflation, or it's because of now potential for tariffs or this, that, or the other. There's a component in there of retail theft, and it's not just shoplifting. It has moved from shoplifting to a lucrative criminal enterprise for some of these groups.
The economic implications are huge. The socioeconomic implications, right? I think to your point, that's impacting a whole generation of the workforce. People that want to feel safe at work. It's something that we took maybe for granted for years until we saw this spike in the past few years. So I think it's important to definitely relate the violence to what's happening in the stores. I think on that note, Sean, what makes organized retail theft so difficult to solve? What's the missing piece there?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I can speak from a Canadian perspective and just being in the industry for as long as I have. And, it's not a policing issue, right? Yeah, the police resources at times are limited and they're tight and they have other competing priorities to focus on within the community when it comes to gun violence and everything else. In our circumstance, it's a justice issue, right? It's a revolving door of, it's not catching, what I would call the soccer mom, that would never steal in her life, coming into a store and stealing for the need to feed their family because they just don't have the funds for it. That I can understand, although it's wrong, you can wrap your head around it. It's the individuals that are coming in every day. They're coming in groups, they're coming in individually, and they're getting arrested and spit back out into the community. In a week, you could have the same offender 3 or 4 times in your store, and police are responding, they're locking them up, they're getting spit back out, right? So it's understanding that every stakeholder has a part to play, but in our circumstance here, speaking candidly, for us, a large part of that is the justice perspective of understanding the jails are full. There's really bad people in jail for sure, but that can't be an excuse to, what I would say condone the bad behavior, because it's impacting retail, it's impacting the community, and it's frustrating for us. It's frustrating for our retail partners. It's frustrating for the officers that have to keep responding. It's the same individual that they're like, hey, I just arrested you 2 days ago. What are you doing back out? The lawlessness behavior of, you're out on conditions, you're out on bail or whatever it is. And so we need a better messaging, to the criminal element and the offenders that are committing this crime. There's consequences, right? It's not just you can do it and, you can scare somebody by being a little bit more aggressive and walking out with product. And you're like, okay, well, that's your weapon of choice, right? You're using fear as your weapon to scare people to get them to do what you want them to do, right? So a lot of this stuff that we see, especially when violence is introduced, has went from a theft to a robbery simply because violence was introduced, whatever that mechanism is.
Yeah, you touched on separating the opportunists from the organized people that are in 3-4 times a week. I think, the impact of the shopping experience of that consumer, but also the availability of the product, right? We heard from Daryl at Rexall earlier, and, over-the-counter medication is something that could make or break a situation for any family in need. So just the availability of that product at the end of the day is something that's going to be critical.
These offenders are leaving the stores with some of these products, right? And you're talking about products that have expiration dates, or they need to be stored in, a certain environment, temperature, or whatever the case is. And they're taking it, and as soon as they leave the store, nobody knows what they've done with that. Right. Could they have thrown it into a car that had contaminants in it? Sure, possibility. Could they have stored it for a period of time before they reintroduced it back into the retail ecosystem and into a consumer unknowingly? 100%, right? So, if the message to the community is, if you don't want to report and you don't want to be anonymous reporting to Crime Stoppers and getting involved, 100% understand that there's that fear.
Sure.
You need to look at it from a personal perspective of, if you are purchasing these products and you know that this product costs this much and you're getting it for a cheaper value, you have to ask yourself why. There has to be that buyer beware. And you have to understand that you're continuing the cycle of criminality. But then from a health perspective, if you're buying these type of products, what danger are you putting yourself or your friends or your family into? And that's the component there where I think, post-COVID, or even before COVID, people are just like, well, as long as I can get it for cheap, it doesn't matter. When you think of contraband tobacco, right? Yeah, I know that I'm going to buy this contraband cigarette that has, probably toxins in it, but it's cheaper than going and buying, a regulated pack. Well, you're putting your health in harm's way. It's the same concept here when you look at retail crime and what's being taken out of the stores and what's being done with items before it's reintroduced into the consumer ecosystem.
I mean, it takes the phrase buyer beware to a whole new level.
For sure.
Especially when you're introducing those harmful elements into it.
The reality there too is, and we've said this plenty of times when we've talked about retail crime since 2013 with Toronto Crime Stoppers, if it can be determined that you are purchasing property obtained by crime, you can criminally be charged, right? So you can say, well, hey, I didn't know. But when you actually have the conversation and they investigate and they say, okay, well, this product is $100 retail. You bought it for $20. How did you not know that there was something wrong here? We're charging you, right? And, that's the other side of the personal decision-making and the personal consequences is, from a health perspective, there you go. But now you're potentially getting yourself into a situation where you're being charged criminally for wanting to have a product or products for cheaper costs.
I love that we touched on the community aspect of it, or bring it back to, ground zero of the retail shop locations where the vicious cycle is often starting and continuing. What are those pieces you think are missing from retail, and what, type of advice would you give retailers looking to solve ROC or combat this in a unified front?
I mean, perfect example is having a conversation with you guys, right? A lot of the decision making that needs to be done now, especially when you're talking, with your senior leaders in your C-suite, is data-driven analytics, right?
Absolutely.
And you can tell a story, you can target a certain problem in a certain area by looking at your data. And if you don't have your data, or your data is not collected in the same portal, and there's different silos that are collecting data here and here, but you're not sharing it, do you really know that you have a problem?
Yep.
Right? So I think using data to drive where you need to put your resources, what do we need to do from a security solution perspective? And every environment is different, right? You can put a security solution in one store and it might not work in another store because it has different demographics, it has different challenges. But if you look at the data, and depending on the data points that you're looking at, you're going to be able to articulate better to senior management to say, here's why I need this and here's why it worked. But also for your team to go to the police and say, hey, here's what we're seeing. Here's all of our data points. Does it match your data points? Because the reality is, in some of these cases, and likely most of these cases, is that you have your store operations team that are frustrated to call police because they don't get the response. And if they do get a response, whether that be from police or the internal loss prevention team, nothing's being done because this offender has been arrested, but they're coming back tomorrow and they're coming back the next day. So the perception is you, loss prevention, you, police, are not doing your job, when in fact we are. And then you have the store operations folks that are not reporting to police. And then when we go to the police, right, from a retail security perspective, and we say, hey, listen, we have a problem at this store or these set of stores, they go and do their call for service analytics. And they're like, well, where do you get I have a problem at this store because our data shows that we haven't been dispatched, we haven't received calls or reports to go to that store. But then we may be able to come back and say, well, they reported internally. Right. Two separate data sets, and the police have to go with what they have, right? So the struggle there is, working with internal stores and the operations to say, you need to report. Here are the reasons why. You may not see it now, but you will see it later. And that comes through a platform that you have, right? It ties in what is going on with different retailers. It's giving the police what they need. And then in the back, it's helping navigate and pointing the dots and drawing those lines where they need to go to help law enforcement, but ultimately to help us in the retail sector of what we need to do in order to give the police what they need, but also have a outcome that we can go back and articulate to our stores. Yeah,
I think engagement is huge, and we talk about it a lot. Empowering store users the right way, letting them know that, hey, something is getting done, something is getting investigated. How do we close that feedback loop and empower them the right way? I love what you said on data collection, right? And often even data collection is in silos. I think in this day and age with ORC, data speaks, actionable data shouts. And I think that's really what gets the buy-in at that high level. So bringing in the vehicle data, bringing in the product data, those web pages of interest, those locations of interest, and tying them to those individuals and those groups is critical. And I think, everything we've just discussed, a lot of that is emotionally driven. I mean, our experiences make us who we are. So that 16-year-old who has their first job in a grocery store, or, somebody who just feels beaten down every single day because nothing's getting done, that perpetuates that cycle. So I think the more we can layer engagement and data together, that's a really powerful thing.
And for sure. I mean, and you're also talking about the partnership, right? You're talking about, your platform helping law enforcement, helping private security deal with issues, but having those conversations, like even today, having conversations with, several police services that are here, and, we bring up your platform, right? Have you talked to the Auror team? Are you on it? And some of them are like, yeah, we're on it. It's great. And then it's okay. Well, now how do we get the retailers to share that information for the law enforcement side of it? And then you come back and you dial back in with Crime Stoppers of reporting anonymously, right? And getting the community to rally around the retailers, to rally around what is going on in their community instead of pointing fingers and providing, excuses as to why, this behavior is being acceptable, because it's not. And how I sum it up is everybody lives in a bubble, whatever is happening over here or in the greater community isn't happening to you. You don't really understand it until it happens to you and it comes into your universe and within your bubble. And then you understand it. And I think, we have to speak up about what is happening in our communities when it comes to criminality, and retail theft is a big part of that, because this is tying in, as I said, this property crime is tying into the violent crime. And if they're able to get caught doing the retail stuff, then maybe they don't get to the violent stuff, and it saves everybody, the world of being involved or being victimized by some of the things that are happening in our community.
Yep. Very, very key component to RCC today was just collaboration.
Yeah.
I mean, retailer to retailer, retailer to law enforcement, how do we come together, bridge that gap, and share this data to reduce the impact that these are having in the community. So
Sure.
Awesome. Sean, I appreciate you. Any final thoughts?
No, I mean, hey, listen, thank you for having me join you guys. Thank you for keeping this discussion going. As I said, if you're listening and you haven't checked out our website, please check out itcostsusall.com. Gives you an idea of what Crime Stoppers is doing and how we're navigating with our partners to bring attention to this issue that we're seeing in the community.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
No, thank you.
We'll see you all next time.
Thank you for listening to the Retail Crime Intelligence Podcast by Auror. Don't forget to follow and subscribe on your favorite podcast app.